Oh, I mean, the reality is that Russian criminal justice and the secret services don't have a great track record with this kind of thing, right? They are able to engineer confessions and engineer convictions in court. This young woman evidently was, talking with both on social media and to friends ahead of her arrest, saying that she didn't know anything about this. She had had nothing to do with it. I think it's going to be very difficult from the outside to judge the veracity of anything that we hear from the Russian authorities on this case going forward. Right?
Yeah, and I mean, she's supposed to be a young Russian woman who is against the war, but Russia immediately blamed Ukraine. They've denied any involvement. It's hard to actually then sort fact from fiction. Would Russia have any reason to target him?
Well, I think it depends what we mean by Russia. I mean, Russia itself is not monolithic. Obviously, it's an authoritarian state controlled pretty tightly by President Putin. But the reality is there are various competing interests in it. We've seen that over the course of the war. So, people like this military blogger that was killed, people like Prigozhin, in whose restaurant, right? He was giving this talk at the time that he was assassinated, right? Have been very critical of parts of the security services and parts of the military. Not critical of Putin himself, but there's a competition for resources, a competition for power and influence, and that competition, has historically, from time to time, turned violent. So it's certainly not beyond the realm of possibility that there would have been people within the Russian system who would have done this. And in fact, it's a little bit easier to believe that than to believe that Ukrainian forces had somehow been able to reach into St. Petersburg, a very tightly controlled security environment from a Russian perspective.
Yeah, and it's not the first time a pro-war advocate has been killed.
No, that's true. We saw the assassination earlier in the war of the daughter of Alexander Dugin, who herself had been a prominent pro-war voice. Dugin himself, of course, is also a prominent supporter of Putin and the Russian imperialism. There again, the Russians did blame the Ukrainians, but the proof really is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah. Sam, how concerned are you around this American journalist who was arrested? Why do you think he has been targeted? It seems totally political.
It does. I would be very concerned. It is, we're going back to, you have to go back to the 1950s to find a time when the Soviet Union was arresting Western journalists on these sorts of charges. That's the sort of thing that just hasn't happened in modern memory. There is evidence that Gershkovich was himself targeted. He seems to have been followed for quite some time. The reality is that Russian law interprets the idea of state secrets and espionage really quite broadly. So anything that the Russian government finds is uncomfortable, they are able to classify as information that should not get out. I think there are very real concerns for Evan's safety, as there is for the safety of any Western journalist or indeed Russian journalist working in Russia today.
Yes, which is why perhaps the US is urging US citizens to leave Russia. Do you think they are working up to some form of prisoner swap?
That may be on the cards. I mean, we have certainly seen that speculation. I think that the Biden administration here in Washington is certainly, having that in mind. But I do think that there's a broader agenda here, which is that, look, the reality is that some of these Western journalists, people like Gershkovich and others, have been able to, get some very good information out of Russia. It has helped helped Western policymakers interpret, the costs and benefits for Putin and the regime of this war, which has helped to calculate Western responses. And that's something that the Kremlin finds uncomfortable. And I think they're coming to the conclusion that they would maybe rather that there weren't so many Western journalists poking around Russia to begin with.
Yeah. The Wagner Group today are flying the Russian flag over Bakhmut, this highly contested city. Is it clear that Russia has finally taken control of the city? Ukraine says they are still fighting.
No, it's not clear. Ukraine, as you said, does say that they are still fighting. Even Wagner itself has indicated that there are still pockets of Ukrainian forces in the city. Of course, the language that people use will differ depending on the message they want to send. This really was seen as a key potential victory for Russia, something like they wanted to have wrapped up several days ago and have been unable to do so. It's also politically important for the Ukrainians. But look, again, the reality is that what we were just talking about, the difficulty of journalists that journalists face in reporting, from both sides of this front line, right, means that we have to trust the words of organizations like Wagner that are fundamentally untrustworthy. We cannot get direct reporting from the front line.
Yeah. Really, really difficult, and it's been very difficult for that city, but we will wait and see what more information we get. Sam, good to have you on. Thanks so much.
Thank you.